It was just a regular Friday night. I had finished a long week of work, and my friends and I decided to hit the local bar to unwind. Nothing fancy, just a small dive with cheap beer and a decent jukebox. You know the kind. You walk in, and it smells like spilled beer and peanuts, but somehow, it feels like home. The bar was pretty quiet for a Friday evening, maybe 10 or 12 people, scattered around the place, sipping their drinks and chatting in low murmurs. I took my usual seat near the back, a spot by the window where I could catch the dim glow of streetlights filtering through the glass. We were talking about everything and nothing: work, life, the usual banter. I was lost in the conversation when something on the TV behind the bar caught my eye. Jesse, the bartender, was flicking through the channels, not really paying attention to anything in particular. But then there was a flash of red and orange. At first, I thought it was just some fire footage from another part of town, but the flickering flames held my attention. There was something about it that felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was nagging at the back of my mind. "Hey, Jess, can you switch it back for a second?" I asked, half paying attention to the conversation, but the image had already registered in my brain. It was just a quick burst of footage, but the angle was odd. It felt like it was close. Jesse did as I asked, and the screen flickered back to the same fire footage. Only this time, the camera angle had changed, zooming out to show a whole building, my building. I froze. "Is that?" I mumbled under my breath, too shocked to finish the sentence. "What's up?" one of my friends asked, noticing my reaction. "You okay?" My gaze was still fixed on the screen. The camera was pulling back, revealing the entire structure. I recognized it instantly. That was my apartment building. That's my place," I whispered. The words came out before I even processed them. The fire looked bad, but not catastrophic. A few floors were burning, probably the upper levels, which wasn't comforting, but I still tried to calm myself down. The building had a good fire alarm system. I knew that much. I hadn't heard anything about it yet, but I still had hope that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. The camera shifted focus, zooming in on the corner of the building where the fire was spreading. Firefighters were just arriving on the scene, and the reporter started speaking. "Firefighters are currently working to contain the fire," the reporter said. "Fortunately, all residents have been evacuated from the building, and the situation is being handled. Authorities are urging everyone to stay clear of the area." But then, something happened that sent chills down my spine. The camera zoomed in even further. Now, I could see the windows of my floor, my apartment window, to be exact. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, but no, I knew it wasn't. The lights in the building had gone out, except for one window on my floor. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I saw movement. A figure. At first, it didn't register what I was looking at. It was a vague shape, dark and out of focus. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it was someone in my apartment. I felt my heart race as I squinted, trying to make out the details. It looked like a person, but there was something wrong about it. The movement was jerky, unnatural. The person was swaying back and forth, arms flailing in strange rhythmic motions. It was like they were dancing, but not in any kind of normal way. It felt almost like a chant, a slow methodical rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was imagining things. But no, the figure was still there, dancing in front of the window, moving in a perfect, unbroken rhythm, repeating the same actions over and over. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things or if the fire had started to mess with my head. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. The figure, it looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same posture, the face too. But the eyes, they were too wide, too big, like something from a nightmare. I heard someone next to me speak, but their words didn't register. I was completely fixated on the screen. The figure in my apartment was still moving. The eyes, that expression, it was wrong. It was like it was me, but at the same time, it wasn't. The camera zoomed in, and for a brief moment, the figure stopped. It tilted its head and looked directly at the camera, and that's when I saw it. The smile. It was wide, too wide. A grin that looked like it belonged on something other than a human face. It wasn't a real smile. It was like a caricature of fear, a twisted mockery of something you would expect to see in a horror film. I froze. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure, it was still grinning, its eyes unnaturally large, staring straight through the window at the camera. And then, as if it was aware of my presence, it waved at me. I couldn't tear my eyes away, even as the screen slowly faded to black. The room around me was silent. No one said a word. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I couldn't move. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what had just happened. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The bar emptied out quickly, and I paid my bill in a daze. I didn't even remember walking out. The only thing I could think of was that figure in the window. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. I called my sister and stayed at her place instead. I told her there had been a fire. I didn't mention the figure. I didn't mention what I'd seen. The next day, I tried to find the footage online. But when I checked the news station's website, the video had been edited. The footage from the fire was still there, but the part with the figure, it was gone, completely erased. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was a trick of the camera. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I don't think I'll ever go back to that apartment. Not after that smile. Not after that thing waved at me. I spent my entire childhood having breathing issues during gym class and would also wake up with bad asthma symptoms. They spent years telling me I couldn't breathe because I was out of shape or fat, definitely was not, and would also try to tell me I was making it up for attention. I vividly remember spending a week unable to breathe because my parents told me I was lying and wouldn't let me use my dad's inhaler and told me I was making it up so I didn't have to go to school. I was looking through my medical record earlier and realized I could see my entire medical history on it. At the very bottom of it was a diagnosis for asthma from 2003. I didn't get an inhaler from the doctor until I was a teenager, a full 10 years later. It had gotten so bad at that point, I was prescribed a steroid inhaler and a rescue inhaler. And the only reason I was able to get this prescribed to me is because I was informed I was old enough to make my own medical decisions without parental consent. My parents' response? They used to hide the inhalers from me and tell me I was addicted to it, and my dad used to take me to fill the prescriptions so he could steal them all and hoard them in a drawer in their bathroom for himself because he didn't have insurance. But I did. My mom also chose not to renew my health insurance, even though it was free, to prevent me from getting them and to prevent me from seeking treatment for my mental health. I'm a 20-year-old woman, and I've been planning a trip to visit my friend and her boyfriend in the US for a week before Christmas. We've been friends for 3 years after meeting online, and we know everything about each other, full names, addresses, etc. I live in Canada and still live with my parents, so I had to let them know about my plans. At first, they were okay with it and even let me buy my plane ticket. But 2 days later, my mom started having doubts. She said she didn't trust my friend and came up with wild theories, like my friend being a prostitute or planning to harm me. To make matters worse, my mom suggested tagging along to meet them first. The problem is, my mom is a narcissist who treats both me and my friend poorly. She's even been rude to her during our calls. My friend is scared of my mom, so the idea of her coming along caused a lot of tension. After days of back and forth, we reached a compromise. I'd spend a few days with my mom first, and then my friend and her boyfriend would pick me up so I could spend the rest of the week with them. Unfortunately, last night, my parents escalated things further. They called the police to convince me not to go. Even though I provided all the information about my friend and shared our agreed-upon plan, the police sided with my parents. I was forced to cancel my ticket, and I had to break the news to my friend. We're all devastated. My family doesn't trust me, doesn't believe my friend is safe, and doesn't care about how this affects me. They've seen her face, know all the details, but still refuse to let me make my own decisions. I feel like I can't trust or open up to anyone anymore, because no matter what I say or do, I'm always in the wrong. I never really had a normal childhood. Most kids look back at their formative years and remember playing outside, going to summer camps, making friends, and all the other fun stuff. Me? I spent most of my youth being raised with one singular purpose: to keep my sister alive. Before I dive into my story, let me tell you a bit about my sister. Her name was Lily, and she was diagnosed with Fanconi anemia when she was just a toddler. It's a rare genetic disorder that makes it incredibly difficult for the body to produce enough blood cells. It means constant treatments, blood transfusions, and most terrifyingly, the risk of organ failure. It's not something a child should ever have to endure, but Lily did, and my parents were desperate to do anything they could to save her. I was born a few years after Lily's diagnosis. My parents were told I might be able to help her survive, and that was all they needed to hear. So, I became the backup plan. They didn't ask me if I was okay with it. They didn't even consider what it might mean for me. From the moment I could walk, my life was dictated by one rule. I had to be healthy. I had to be ready to donate blood, bone marrow, kidneys, or anything else that could keep Lily alive. My body was no longer just mine. It was a resource, her resource. I couldn't play sports. The risk of injury was too great. I couldn't eat junk food. Everything I put in my body had to be as clean and healthy as possible, so my organs would always be ready for harvest. If I even thought about taking any medicine, my mother would flip out. I remember once when I was 7, I had a headache at school, and the nurse gave me some Tylenol. My mom showed up at the school, screaming that they'd just jeopardized her daughter's future. I never felt like I had control over my own body, and while I lived this suffocating life of rules and restrictions, my parents turned a blind eye to my needs. They were so focused on Lily's illness, on her survival, that they completely forgot about me. My father buried himself in his work. My mother, she was a tyrant. She'd make sure everything I did was for Lily's benefit. And if I ever showed even the slightest sign of rebellion, I'd get an earful of guilt and shame. My brother was a different story. He wasn't involved in any of the surgeries, but he got everything else: freedom, money, indulgence. Our parents practically threw credit cards at him to keep him happy while I spent every waking moment being a spare part. By the time I was 16, I had grown up. I was old enough to understand the full weight of what my life had become. It wasn't just that I was living under constant medical surveillance. It was that I had no identity beyond being useful to my sister. The idea of college seemed so far away, because how could I leave when they might need me at any moment? But I tried. I studied hard, trying to earn enough scholarships to escape. The moment I got my acceptance letter to a university in another city, I thought, this is it. I'm free. But my mother quickly squashed that dream. She forged rejection letters from the university, claiming they hadn't accepted me, and even convinced my school to let me stay at home. You can't leave. Lily needs you. And I stayed. All the way until I was 19. When Lily's liver failed, things reached a boiling point. They needed a liver transplant, and they wanted mine. For the first time, I was technically an adult, and I thought, maybe this is where I draw the line. But my mother didn't give me a choice. She threatened to stop paying for my college tuition. She said I'd never make it on my own. Her words hit me harder than anything she had ever said before. I couldn't live this life anymore. I ended up going through with the transplant. They removed part of my liver. The surgery was hard, and the recovery was brutal. But somehow, my mother's control over me was even harder to bear. A few months after the surgery, Lily passed away. The complications from the transplant were too much for her to handle. I remember the funeral. Everyone was crying, but all I could think about was freedom. I couldn't allow myself to smile, but it was the first time in my life that I felt relieved. After Lily's death, I found myself standing at a crossroads. I had spent my entire life being a spare part for someone else, but now I was free. The first thing I did was apply to universities abroad. I didn't care if I had to live on ramen noodles. For the next 4 years, I was getting out. I'm starting grad school in a few weeks, studying stem cell research, hoping that one day I can help people like me, people who were born as nothing but a backup plan. But I also want to make sure I never forget what it felt like living a life that wasn't my own, being treated like I was just a resource, just a vessel for someone else's survival. And maybe, just maybe, I can help make sure that no one else has to go through what I did. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that no one should ever be treated as a tool for someone else's survival. Every life has value, not just as a donor, but as a person, a human being with their own dreams and rights.